I stopped counting the days after the first winter alone. That is what a man does when he has decided the world can go on without him, and he would rather not watch it try. The peach orchard sat on 42 acres at the end of a gravel road in Persimmon County, and I had bought it with the last money I could prove was mine. Before that, I built things, commercial work mostly, strip malls, medical offices, the kind of buildings people walk through without ever wondering who framed the walls. My name was on the company alongside a man I had called my best friend for 20 years, and I trusted him the way you trust a brother, which is to say completely and without the common sense God gives a fence post. Darren took $400,000 out of our operating accounts over the course of 2 years. He billed phantom subcontractors, inflated material invoices, and when the auditors came knocking, he had already restructured the paperwork so every fraudulent signature looked like mine. I spent 11 months trying to clear my name, lost the business, lost the house in Colton, lost the willingness to look another person in the eye and believe a word they said. So I bought the orchard. It had been neglected for 3 seasons when I found it, the trees half wild and the irrigation lines cracked and leaking into the red clay. I liked that about it. Nothing out here pretended to be something it wasn't. I fixed the pump house, patched the farmhouse roof, and taught myself to prune from a library book, so old the binding crumbled when I opened it flat. The peaches came back the second year, small and stubborn and sweet enough to make your teeth ache, and I sold them at a roadside stand a mile from the property line. I did not talk to the neighbors beyond what was necessary. I did not go to church or the diner or the 4th of July picnic at the fairgrounds. I tacked a handwritten help wanted ad on the board at Delton's Feed and Supply. The June the harvest looked like more than one man could handle, and I figured nobody would answer it because nobody ever came this far out unless they were lost. She pulled in on a Tuesday morning in a hatchback that was burning oil so badly I could smell it before I could see the car. The engine ticked and pinged after she shut it off, the way metal does when it has been pushed past what it was built to endure. She got out with a canvas bag over one shoulder and a folder of papers in her hand, and she stood at the gate like she was deciding whether coming here had been a mistake or just the latest in a long series of them. Her boots were good, broken in, not broken down. She wore a cotton button-up with the sleeves rolled past her elbows, and her hair was pulled back tight enough that it tugged at her temples. She had the posture of someone who was used to standing in front of people who didn't want to listen to her. I walked to the gate with a pruning knife still in my hand because I had not expected company and had no intention of pretending otherwise. "I'm here about the ad at Delton's," she said. "The harvest position." I looked at the car, the bag, the folder she held like a shield. "You drove a long way for a seasonal job on a farm nobody's heard of." "I drove a long way because nobody else is hiring me right now." She said it flat without apology, the way you report the weather. Then she straightened her shoulders and added, "I don't need your pity." "Good," I told her. "I need your help instead." Her name was Lena Calloway, and the folder she handed me contained a degree in agricultural management from the State University, 3 years of field reports from her last position at a commercial growing operation in Denton County, and a termination letter that said almost nothing useful. She told me the rest standing at the gate with her arms crossed and the sun making her squint. She had reported her employer, a man named Hadley Caulfield, for housing migrant workers in conditions that violated county health codes. Caulfield ran the largest stone fruit operation in the eastern half of the state, and he had the kind of money that makes people forget what they saw and remember what they were told. Lena filed the complaint. The county sent an inspector. The inspector found the violations, cited the operation, and within 48 hours, Lena was terminated for what Caulfield's attorney called performance issues that preceded the complaint. She left without severance or a reference letter. Every farm and growing operation within 200 miles had Caulfield's number in their phone, and not one of them would return her calls. "I'm not asking you to believe me," she said. "I'm asking you to let me prove I can do the work." The arrangement was simple enough that it fit on the back of a receipt. She would manage the harvest through the end of the season. I would give her the small room off the kitchen that I had been using for storage, 3 meals a day, and a reference letter when the work was done. If the letter was honest and the work was good, she could take it anywhere she wanted and start over. I cleared the room that afternoon while she unloaded the hatchback. There wasn't much: a box of books, a duffel bag of clothes, a pair of work gloves that were better than mine. She stood in the doorway of the small room with its iron frame bed and bare walls and single window that looked out over the east rows, and she nodded once like she was confirming something to herself. "This is fine," she said. "It's not much." I didn't ask for much. We ate supper at the kitchen table that night with the windows open and the smell of warm grass coming through the screens. She asked me how many trees were in production and how I had been managing the irrigation schedule. And when I told her, she looked at me for a long moment and said, "You've been watering at the wrong time of day, and your yield is probably 30% below what these trees can give you." I could have taken offense at that. Instead, I handed her the irrigation manual I had photocopied at the library and told her to show me what she meant in the morning. She did. By the end of her first week, Lena had reorganized the watering schedule, identified 11 trees that needed to be pulled and replaced, and built a harvest tracking sheet on a clipboard she hung from a nail by the back door. She worked from first light until the heat drove her inside after lunch, then picked up again when the shadows got long. She did not complain about the work. She did not ask personal questions. She did not knock on my door in the evening or sit on the porch uninvited. She moved through the orchard like she was reading it, touching the bark, checking the leaf color, crouching to look at the soil the way a doctor looks at something that concerns him, but does not alarm him yet. I watched all of this from a distance I told myself was professional. The peaches came on heavy that July, the branches bowing low enough that we had to prop them with cut timber to keep them from cracking. Lena and I worked side by side through the rows, and I learned the rhythm of her without ever discussing it. She picked from the left. I picked from the right. She stacked the crates too high because she was shorter and could reach without a ladder. I loaded the truck bed and drove the crates to the cold room we had rigged in the pump house. On market days, she came with me to the roadside stand and handled the customers while I weighed and bagged. She had a way with people that I had forgotten existed, a quiet confidence that made strangers trust her. An older woman from town named Ida Pearl started coming every Saturday just to talk to Lena about her garden. And Lena listened to her the way people listen when they are genuinely interested and not just waiting for their turn to speak. On Sundays, she baked. I had not kept flour in the kitchen since I moved in, and she bought a 5-pound bag at Delton's without asking and started making biscuits that filled the house with a smell so specific it made my hands go still on whatever I was holding. Her mother had been a baker, she told me, standing at the counter with flour on her wrists. Died when Lena was 22. She said it simply, the way you mention the weather in a month that has already passed, and I understood that she had carried that loss long enough to set it down when she chose to. I noticed things about her that I should not have been cataloging. The way she pushed her sleeves up before she started any task, like she was making a decision with her forearms. The way she hummed when she was alone in the rows and didn't know I could hear her. The way she left a glass of cold water on the porch railing for me every afternoon without mentioning it, so that I could drink it without having to thank her. One afternoon, I came in from repairing the fence line on the north boundary and found her sitting at the kitchen table with my accounts ledger open in front of her. She had not asked permission. She did not apologize for looking. "You're underpricing by $1.60 a pound," she said. "Every other small operation in the county charges more, and your fruit is better than theirs." I price to sell, not to profit. Those are the same thing, Garrett. You just forgot. She was right. I raised the prices at the roadside stand the following Saturday, and not a single customer walked away. One evening in late July, a thunderstorm rolled in fast from the west, and we scrambled to get the tarps over the drying racks before the rain hit. We were both soaked through by the time we got the last tarp tied down, standing under the pump house overhang with our shirts heavy, and the rain hammering the tin roof so loud that we had to lean close to hear each other. You know you're good at this, I told her. I was not talking about the tarps. She looked at me with rain running down the side of her face. I know, she said. That's why it made Caulfield so angry. I was the best manager he ever had, and I turned on him anyway. You didn't turn on him. You told the truth. Same thing in his world. We stood there for a while, close enough that I could smell the rain on her skin and the faint sweetness of the peaches in her hair, and neither of us moved or spoke or pretended the silence was uncomfortable. It was around that time that she found the photographs. I kept a box in the back of the hall closet that I had not opened since I moved in. Old project photos mostly. Buildings I had framed, foundations I had poured, a company Christmas party where Darren and I stood side by side, grinning like we had beaten the world. Lena wasn't snooping. She was looking for extra towels after the storm, and the box was sitting on the shelf behind them. She didn't mention it at dinner. She waited until we were on the porch after, sitting in the two mismatched chairs I had dragged out there when I first arrived, and she said it quietly without looking at me. You built things. Before this. I did. Do you miss it? The question sat in my chest like a stone. I watched the last of the storm clouds pull away from the ridgeline, and the first stars appear in the gap they left behind, and I told her something I had not said out loud to any living person. Every single day. She didn't offer comfort. She didn't tell me I should go back to it, or that things would get better, or that time heals anything. She just said, I know what it feels like to be good at something and have someone take it from you. Then she went inside, and I heard the screen door close behind her, and I sat on the porch for another hour, trying to breathe around the tight feeling in my throat. That quiet didn't last. I should have known it when Lena mentioned Caulfield's connections in the county. A man like that doesn't lose a fight and let the other person walk away clean. The first sign was Jim Gatlin at the co-op telling me he couldn't buy my peaches anymore. Jim had been my only wholesale account, and he said it with his eyes aimed somewhere past my left shoulder, the way people do when they are repeating someone else's words and hoping you won't ask whose. Quality concerns was what he called it. I had been selling him the same peaches for 2 seasons without a single complaint. A week later, the county agricultural inspector showed up unannounced. A man in a pressed shirt and clean boots who walked through my rows with a clipboard and found exactly nothing wrong, but told me he would need to come back for a follow-up in 30 days. Lena stood at the edge of the orchard, watching him drive away, and her face had gone pale in a way I had not seen before. That's Caulfield, she said. He knows I'm here. How? Ida Pearl. She mentioned me to someone at church. In a town this small, that's all it takes. I could have told her that it wasn't her fault. I could have said that Caulfield's reach didn't extend to my property, that this was my land and my business, and nobody was going to push me off it. But I had spent 3 years learning that the people with money and connections can reach anywhere they want, and I was not going to lie to her. What does he want? I asked. He wants me to disappear. He wants the complaint to have no face attached to it, so he can pretend it never happened. This is where the story takes a turn nobody expected, including me. Instead of pulling back, I leaned in. I drove to every roadside stand and farmer's market within 60 miles and introduced myself as the owner of Callaway Peach, and I used her name on purpose because she had earned it. I handed out samples and left my number and told every buyer that if they liked what they tasted, I could deliver weekly through September. Lena rode with me on those trips, and by the third week, we had replaced Jim Gatlin's account with 4 smaller ones that paid better per pound. Caulfield responded the way men like him always do. He didn't come himself. He sent pressure through channels. A bank officer in town called about my line of credit, asking questions about the property that had already been answered during the original loan application. A notice arrived from the county saying my roadside stand permit was under review. Small things. The kind of harassment that doesn't leave fingerprints, but makes you feel like the walls are closing in from every side. That week, I found Lena sitting on the back steps after dark with her knees drawn up and the inspection binder open beside her. The porch light caught the edges of the pages, and she was reading them like she was memorizing evidence for a trial she expected to lose. I sat down beside her without saying anything, and after a while she leaned sideways until her shoulder rested against mine, and we stayed that way until the last cricket went quiet. "He did this to the woman who reported before me," she said. "Another manager, 2 years earlier. She never filed because he threatened her green card. She went back to Guatemala and nobody heard from her again." "You're not going back anywhere." "You don't know that." "I know you're sitting on my porch and I'm not asking you to leave." Lena wanted to fight it publicly. I told her to let me handle it, and she looked at me with an expression that was equal parts frustration and something else I could not name. "You don't have to protect me," she said. "I've been fighting this man for over a year." "I'm not protecting you. I'm protecting the orchard. You just happen to be standing in it." She almost smiled at that. Almost. The trouble came to a head on a Saturday in August, the kind of day where the heat sits on your shoulders like a physical weight, and the air smells like dust and ripe fruit. We were at the farmer's market in Baxter with our crates stacked on the tailgate when a truck pulled up and 2 men got out and started telling the vendor beside us that our peaches had been flagged by the county for pesticide concerns. They said it loud enough for every customer within earshot to hear. They stood there afterward with their arms crossed like they were waiting for us to pack up and leave. Lena stepped down from the tailgate and walked straight toward them. I started to move, but she was faster. "You work for Hadley Caulfield," she said. It was not a question. "Lady, we're just passing along what we heard. What you heard is a lie, and you know it's a lie, because the county inspection report for this orchard is clean, and I have a copy right here in this truck." She did. She had made photocopies of every document I had ever received from the county, and she kept them in a binder in the cab, the way some people keep a first aid kit. She held the binder up and said, loud enough for the customers and the other vendors to hear, "Anyone who wants to see our inspection results is welcome to come look." The 2 men left, but the damage was already spreading. 2 of our new accounts called that week to cancel, citing concerns they could not articulate beyond, "We just think it's best." The farmers market organizer in Baxter left a message saying our application for the following month was being reviewed. It rained that night, not the quick thunderstorms of summer, but a long, soaking rain that turned the gravel road to mud and sent water running through the east rows where the drainage was weakest. I heard the pump alarm at 3 in the morning and pulled on my boots and went out in the dark with a flashlight to check the lines, and I found the main valve on the east irrigation block had been opened all the way. The rows were flooding. Another hour and the root systems in that section would have been damaged badly enough to lose the next season's crop. I closed the valve and stood there in the rain with mud up to my shins and the flashlight shaking in my hand because my hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from the understanding of what had just happened. Someone had been on my property. Someone had opened that valve deliberately. Lena was standing on the back porch when I came around the house. She had heard the alarm too. She was barefoot in the rain, holding the porch post with one hand, and her face was the color of the sky before a bad storm. "Someone opened the east valve," I said. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, They were wet with more than rain. "I'll leave," she said. "If I leave, he'll stop." I climbed the porch steps and stood in front of her, close enough that the rain was hitting both of us, and I said the truest thing I knew. I spent 3 years letting someone else decide what I was worth. I'm not doing it again, and I'm not letting you do it either. Garrett, you're staying. You barely know me. I know you fixed my irrigation, rebuilt my accounts, and stood down 2 men in a parking lot with a binder full of paperwork. I know you hum when you're alone, and you leave water on the porch for me, and you haven't once asked me to be anything other than what I am. I could feel my pulse wrong in my throat, too hard and too fast, and I kept talking, because stopping felt like it would break something. I don't know when this became more than a work arrangement. Maybe the night you asked me if I missed building things and actually wanted to hear the answer. Maybe before that. I don't know. But I know I'm not sending you away to satisfy a man who's afraid of what you might say about him. She didn't say anything for a long time. The rain filled the silence, and the porch light made the water on her face look like something that should be held gently. I stopped thinking of this as temporary 3 weeks ago, she said. I just didn't know how to tell you without ruining the only good thing I've had in a year. I kissed her standing in the rain on that porch with my boots leaving mud on the boards and her hands cold against my jaw. It was clumsy and honest and tasted like rain and the kind of relief that sits in your chest for hours after. The next morning, I called Earl Henson, my closest neighbor, at 4 miles down the road. Earl was 70 years old and had lived in Persimmon County his entire life, and he knew everybody's business, whether they wanted him to or not. I told him what had been happening: the canceled accounts, the inspector, the men at the market, the opened valve. He listened without interrupting, which was unusual for Earl, and when I finished, he said, "Caulfield's been pulling this kind of thing for years. Everybody knows it. Nobody says it because he buys enough county produce to keep half the operations in the valley solvent. I'm saying it. I figured you were. That's why I'm telling you to call Margaret Pace at the Baxter Gazette. She's been trying to write that housing violation story for 8 months, and she can't find anyone willing to go on record." I looked at Lena across the kitchen table. She was holding her coffee with both hands and watching me, and I saw the moment she understood what Earl was suggesting. "I'll do it," she said. "I'll go on record." She called Margaret Pace that afternoon. Margaret drove out the next day with a recorder and a notebook and sat at our kitchen table for 3 hours while Lena walked her through every detail. The photographs Lena had taken before she was fired, the original complaint, the inspector's report, the termination letter, and the pattern of retaliation that had followed her to my orchard. The story ran 2 weeks later, front page of the weekly edition, below the fold, with a follow-up online that got picked up by 2 regional outlets. Caulfield's operation was cited again, this time by the state, and 3 other former employees came forward with their own complaints once they saw that someone else had gone first. Caulfield never came to my gate. He never called. He never sent anyone again. What he did was go quiet, the way a man goes quiet when he realizes the room has stopped listening to him. His wife filed for divorce that fall, according to Earl, and I felt a brief and uncomfortable flash of something that was not quite sympathy, but close to it. A man who builds his entire life on making other people afraid does not have anything left when the fear dries up. Our accounts came back. Jim Gatlin showed up at the roadside stand in September with his hat in his hands and said he was sorry, and I let Lena decide whether to sell to him again. She did, at a higher price per pound, and Jim didn't argue. The season ended in late October, when the last of the cling peaches came off the trees and the leaves started to turn. Lena had been living at the orchard for 4 months, and the reference letter I had promised her was sitting in an envelope on the kitchen counter, sealed and stamped and ready to go. She never opened it. I found her one morning in early November, standing in the east rows with a soil probe in one hand and a notebook in the other, testing the ground for next season's planting depth. She had her sleeves pushed up past her elbows the way she always did before she started working, and she was humming something low and tuneless that she never seemed to finish. I leaned against the fence post at the end of the row and watched her for a while. The sun was coming through the bare branches in long white lines, and the air was sharp and clean the way it gets in the hill country when fall turns serious. "You're still here," I said. She looked up from the notebook. "You're still surprised by that?" "Less every day." She crossed the row and stood beside me, close enough that her shoulder touched my arm, and we looked out over the orchard together. The trees were stripped down to their bones, all gray bark and crooked branches against the pale sky, and they looked the way things look when they are resting, not dying. Waiting for the season to turn again, trusting that it would. "I want to graft new stock onto the east rows in the spring," she said. "There's a late season variety out of Georgia that would extend our harvest by 3 weeks." "That sounds like a long-term plan." "That's because it is." I put my arm around her shoulders and she leaned into me, and we stood there without speaking, while the wind moved through the orchard with a dry, papery sound that was the trees letting go of the last things they did not need anymore. The reference letter stayed in its envelope on the counter all through the winter. By January, it had a coffee ring on it and a stack of seed catalogs piled on top. By February, I had stopped noticing it entirely. It was just another thing in the kitchen that had been there so long, it felt like it had always been there, which is another way of saying it felt like home. I still don't build strip malls or frame walls for strangers, but I build things. I built new raised beds along the south wall for Lena's herb garden. I built a better sorting table for the pump house. I built shelves in the small room off the kitchen that she still calls hers, even though most nights she falls asleep in mine. In the mornings, I wake up to the sound of her footsteps on the porch and the smell of coffee and the particular quiet that comes from knowing you do not have to face the day alone. A man can convince himself that loneliness is the same thing as safety. I did for 3 years, and I was wrong about it the way I was wrong about Darren, which is to say, completely. But the orchard taught me something that Darren never could. Some things grow better when you stop trying to do everything alone. You let someone else's hands in the soil. You trust the roots to hold. And when the season turns, you find out that what you built together is stronger than what you lost. The porch light stays on now every night, whether we are expecting anyone or not.